Hello, friends. We are back at episode 230 of the Our Weekly Highlights podcast. That's a nice little round number. And this is the weekly podcast where we talk about the excellent highlights and additional resources that have been shared on this week's Our Weekly issue at ourweekly.org. Easy for me to say. It's Friday. What can I say? My name is Eric Nance, and I'm delighted that you join us from wherever you are around the world. It has been a hot few days here in the Midwest, but things may be starting to cool off just a tad. But, our weekly highlights always keep us hot. And, my co-host does his share of hot moments, I'm sure. Mike Thomas. Mike, how are you doing today?
Good. Happy to be here. Episode 230. Best episode to go to the dentist. That's my dad joke for the day. And the World Cup has started, so I am super excited about that. It's USA plays today, so we'll see how it goes. Fingers crossed. And it should be a great group, and we got a great group of highlights.
We sure do, yeah. So welcome to all the international soccer, football viewers here in the U.S. It's never a dull moment in this country, to say the least. But great international audience. And we always have an international audience here on this very podcast. So wherever you are around the world, I mean that because we do have a global audience. But hey, let's get this show on the road, shall we? We are talking about this week's issue, week 24 of the 2026 year, and our curator for this issue is Batol Almarzak. And as always, she had tremendous help from our fellow RWiki team members and contributors like all of you around the world with your pull requests and other wonderful suggestions. And much like how, software updates, it's just the way of the software dev life cycle, our favorite language will update typically 2 or 3-ish times a year, and that is the R language, of course. And very recently, we welcomed R version 4.6 to be available on CRAN and all the CRAN mirrors. If you've updated your system already, I'm sure you're seeing some nice improvements. Over the years, there has always been sometimes a few gotchas, a few things you need to be worried about or be concerned about, perhaps, when you update your system. Historically speaking, at least in my early days of using R, especially on the Windows environment, you would notice that my packages are gone. Well, they're not gone. It's just the new version has its own library of packages, so you often have to reinstall them. There have been attempts to make that smoother in the community. I've seen a few from time to time. But there's another factor at play here that I did not appreciate very much, only because I didn't know this capability existed. Well, architecture gets very modern these days, right? And I am very fortunate that the day job is given for my work machine an Apple MacBook with the M4 chip in this current implementation, and it's nice, I dare say. Now again, I prefer Linux. Most of you know my previous diatribes know I'm a Linux fan first, but hey, Mac OS does have some Unix philosophies to it. There are situations, though, where you could take advantage of the newer hardware that Apple offers, and maybe you have taken advantage of that, but maybe an update kind of said bye-bye to that advantage, or at least that flag of that configuration. That's what we're talking about in this first highlight here. It comes to us from Ulrich Otz. Hopefully I'm saying that right. He is an assistant professor of accounting at Bocconi University. And he is, like me, a user of R on the Mac platform, maybe for his, day job work or whatnot. Well, this time when he made the update, he lost a certain configuration that has helped him with performance, but he was able to get it back. What was this optimization, you may ask? That has to do with the Basic Linear Algebra Subprograms Library. You may know the acronym more than that as BLAS for short. This is what the operating system has to handle very complicated, linear algebra, as the name suggests, and hopefully in a very optimized way. So throughout different operating systems, you have had the ability to tweak the BLAS, if you will, the BLAS utility that R maps to. It comes with its own BLAS utility that is meant to be agnostic to your OS. But with the advent of, as I mentioned, the Apple Silicon M chips, you do have the ability to utilize the Apple's Accelerate framework for their version of BLAS. They call it veclib for short, and it is an optimized BLAS implementation tailored once again to the Mac CPU architecture. And the R core team knows about this, and they have a caveat, as Ulrich puts in his post, that it is fast, but the R team has no control over what Apple might do to either change this, or perhaps it might deliver incorrect results. So the default, whenever you install R, is to use the BLAS implementation that comes with R itself. So that is, a fair caveat. I think that is worth noting. But again, you are in control of your own R installation, and Ulrich here knows that caveat, but he wants to use the Apple Silicon version of BLAS. So when he realizes that after updating the version 4.6, suddenly those performance gains that he had when he had this on a previous R version and making that tweak were gone. But there is an easy fix, and it does have to do with little Linux info, if you know your command line tools, which we'll get to in a bit. You may wonder, which one are you using? How do I know which one you're using? Well, that's where the base R functionality has a function called session info. I've used this many, and I do mean many times. But you will notice in the output, typically speaking, you will see, at least in recent R versions, a little output for how matrix computations are generated. And it will show which versions of, in this case, BLAS and LAPACK, LAPACK, however you want to pronounce it, and where those are being pointed to in the hardware library. And you may wonder, well, you may see these cryptic file names here. How do you know which one is which? In the blog post, he notes that if there's a 0 in the file name somewhere, that means you're on R's implementation of this and what he deems as a slower path, which it probably is. So how do you rectify this issue? If you want to be on the cutting edge with your operating system, that's where a very handy command line program, if you will, called LN. That is what we use to create symbolic links, or you might call shortcuts in your OS. You can simply run one of these to point to what R thinks is the path to the linear algebra library, and instead tell it where it really should point to. So you're kind of like changing a path to go to another path, but R doesn't really know too much about it. It just thinks it's the original file. So the command is in the show notes. I don't want to read that verbatim because that would bore you all probably to tears. But once you have that, he did verify in an R session. He tested out just a simple matrix calculation using R norm of n times n and replicating that n times, which is 3,000 in this example. And in the reference R implementation, that computation takes about 7 seconds. With using the BLAS routine on Apple Silicon, it's down to, get this, 0.15 seconds. Oh my goodness. Yeah, that's some pretty nice gains right there. So if you're doing heavy simulations or data generation with complicated matrix algebra, it probably is worth your time to explore it, just knowing the caveats that the R core team put at the outset. But this idea, as he mentions in the conclusion, does apply to different OSs. So on Linux, there is the OpenBLAS routine that you can install on your platform, and also compile it against certain processors, such as the Intel family of processors, and you might get some speed up gains with that. So there are links to go to the R installation administration manual where you can find more details on that. But it just does go show you, you may think you're done after updating, everything's just fine. Sometimes these issues are silent, but then you don't realize it until you've done what you've always done and realize, this one's taking a bit longer than usual. So great announcement or a reminder here from Ulrich. If you've been on the Mac OS platform and you've been benefiting from the linear algebra routines, you may want to check this when you do your next update.
Yeah, I wonder how many similar gotchas like this there are out there. I've got to imagine that there's a few. we have REnv, the REnv package for environment management, and it's super important to be cognizant of the dependencies in your project. Little things can make a big difference, as it's evidenced here. And however, I do feel like CRAN provides us with a few more safeguards around this than like the Wild West of PI. That's my hot take of R versus Python debate for the day. And the way that you can handle this particular situation with symlinks is fantastic. Symlinks are awesome. I have also been burned by symlinks on more than one occasion.
Yes. Use responsibly, as I would say, putting on my HPC admin hat.
Proceed with caution.
Yes.
And I also remember that there was a pretty significant change, I think, in how R used the combination of like set seed and sample in version 3.6, where your results might actually be different if
Yes.
you kind of ran that combination of functions pre 3.6 versus post 3.6. So not only do you have to care about your package versions, but the version of R itself, while quite stable over the years, there have been a few tiny gotchas like that you need to be cognizant of. So this is a great rundown of this particular scenario that you could run into if you have one of those super cool Mac OS operating systems, which Eric, you have. You're making it sound pretty awesome. You're making Ketchbrook sound kind of behind the times. We're still on the Windows and the Dell XPS hardware, but we work in Linux environments if that counts for anything. But we'll get to the Mac one day.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I'm probably not taking enough advantage of it. Although I will be fair to say that about 80-ish% of my development these days is on the local Mac with R installed via the rig utility, which I highly, highly recommend. I cannot recommend it more enough, I should say, because I can have multiple R versions, just switch them with one command. It is huge for reproducibility and bringing up legacy projects that maybe have been on, say, R 4.4, and then be able to say R 4.5, and now more recently 4.6. So we'll put a link to rig as well as RM in the show notes. Those two are a great combination for me personally. But with that said, yeah, I have only scratched the surface of what we can do from a performance standpoint. Although I am seeing that, spoiler alert, another AI mention here, that running local models on Apple Silicon is pretty nice. And as a Linux user, it does make me a bit jealous that we're not quite there yet with we're getting there with the Linux side, depending on how much you want to pay for graphic cards and whatnot. But Apple definitely did their homework with the ability to run local AI LLMs seamlessly, perhaps with a program like LM Studio, for example. You throw that on your Mac, and running Gemma 4 is pretty easy. So I am spoiled. I definitely can sympathize with anybody who wishes they had this, but rest assured, I still prefer Linux. I still prefer Linux. So it's OS as a desktop environment is kind of like meh to me, but I'm not there for the desktop environment. I'm living in Positron. I'm living in VS Code, and I'm either SSH to an HPC session. That's my life these days. Up next in our highlights today, we are going to talk about a topic that Mike and I do find ourselves dealing with one way or another, whether it's code that we developed or maybe we inherited code from someone else. It may work, right? But there may be cases where we want to clean things up a bit. We're talking about the world of refactoring, everybody. And I'm about to embark on a major refactoring of a legacy app probably next week on this. So this next highlight is pretty timely. So refactoring is the type of work where not the most glamorous work out there. You often just want to get it done probably as quickly as possible and hopefully with minimal effort. Although, it definitely pays to do things the right way when you're in the refactoring side of it. So we're going to hear about the experience of refactoring from two very prominent software developers in the world of R, and with a utility that we have spoken about in the past that gives you some really nice ways to refactor with some speed to boot. And so this post is a tag team of authors here, coming from Hannah Frick, who is a software engineer at Posit, as well as Mael Salman, former our weekly curator and also a research software engineer. And they're talking about a recent experience they had with refactoring with the Jarl utility. So let's set the stage here, shall we? As they mentioned, like I did, this type of work is pretty, not the most highlight, if you will, of your day to day. But Hannah was looking into some legacy code in the Tune package, which is part of the Tidy Models ecosystem. And she looked to maybe leveraging an AI LLM with Claude to refactor some of that. And her and Mael were talking a bit. And then Mael said, hey, you know what? Maybe you want to check out the Jarl utility created by Etim Bakr, and which is, if you're not familiar with this is a optimized R linter, and you might say a tool in the refactoring toolbox written in Rust for speed and obviously other considerations. And one of the things they can do is they can check for, perhaps in your code base, maybe for a package, you've got some functions in there and they're just not being used anywhere else, perhaps. So that, amongst other things, Mael wrote an entire blog post, which I'll link to in the show notes, about how she is really appreciating the use of Jarl, and combining that with the Tree Sitter utility, which has taken the community in a lot of interesting directions with R, even in things like GitHub and whatnot. So Mael was kind of joking with Hannah that, maybe you shouldn't always use Claude to do this refactoring. So Hannah said, okay, challenge accepted. I'm going to try Jarl out and see how it performs for some additional refactoring. So the rest of this post talks about that experience. With Jarl, if you just want to run it from the command line itself, pointing it to your code base, if you navigate to your folder of the code, you can just run the check function. And it will give you a lot of output. And it did have some nuggets in there that were helpful to her, such as the number of errors, of course, that it found, but also how many were automatically fixable. And then, but another way to tidy this output that she found in the help documentation is put the -- statistics option with it. And then you get a nice little breakdown of the types of errors, types of rules that were broken. And this is where it was really helpful, is that she saw many of them were dealing with things like implicit assignment or maybe internal functions. And then also, interestingly enough, some of these like any is an A, other rules like this. And some of these rules are flagged to have an automatic fix that you can opt into with Jarl. So this was, again, they're both learning from each other, right? The statistics flag, Mael didn't realize that at first. And it would have been easy, as Hannah says here, to just run that check and then supply the -- fix flag to do those automatic fixes. But this was a learning opportunity. She wanted to see just what are the rules that are being used by Jarl and seeing how to apply each of them on a case-by-case basis. So what's interesting is that you can select which rules are being used by Jarl at a given invocation by using the -- select flag and feeding in the name of the rule, such as this any_is_na rule, amongst others. And then she liked this because then she could separate out updates to the package in separate PRs pertaining to each rule, instead of one massive PR, which sometimes can be a bit tricky for a maintainer to deal with. So having that separation of one PR does one particular thing, whether it's in one code file or a set of related ones, I know that's always easier for me to deal with as a maintainer, even if I'm the one doing the PR. There's only so much time in the day. Sometimes I don't get to my own PRs for like a week afterwards. I just do it while it's fresh and have to move on to something else. So I think that's a little nugget that some of you can take away is that don't make your PRs so bloated, right? Try to keep them fit for purpose. So then she also then went through the ones that had the automatic fixes and then the ones without. And sure enough, we got the link to the post that we're talking about here has what that PR actually looks like. And also Mael was comments here. And for her refactoring of iGraph recently, she started going with the ones with the least quote unquote violations and then going to the ones that had the most violations. So the nice thing is you can pick and choose which of these rules you start with. And so another thing that she used for this is the parsnip package. And that was where the Jarl utility flagged a few functions that were not used, such as this release underscore bullets function that they thought they wanted to keep around, but maybe it didn't really need it or whatnot. So she did end up keeping one of the other ones because there was a logical reason, but at least Jarl was telling her which ones are used and not used. So the takeaway that they both have here is that Jarl is a great way to do your refactoring. And in this case, no LLM is really needed in this invocation because it will find a lot of interesting things for you, such as duplicated function definitions, functions that just aren't being used anymore, as we talked about earlier, and any code that simply just can never be reached. And that might be if you have some very complex if-else's, nested if-else's, or maybe parameters that just will never really change. There are lots of interesting things you can do that. And you can also do checks of your test stat code as well. And you can use the -- select and then put in uppercase, test that, and it will do some linting or potential refactoring with your test stat code and treat that differently than it would with your basic package code. So Jarl looks really fantastic. I have it installed on my system. I just haven't actually put it through the paces yet. But certainly for my refactoring I'm about to do, I will definitely give Jarl a spin and get some blazing fast Rust-powered speed to get to those fixes really quickly.
I think, we had covered Jarl previously, Eric, but I totally glossed over it. And after reading this blog post, I need to bring Jarl into my projects. It's a no-brainer, especially for maintenance of stale projects, but also, why not for current projects during development? One thing I was wondering is how Etienne determines what constitutes smelly code. And I wonder if it's sort of a list of rules that Jarl looks for, or maybe something more programmatic than that. I'd be curious. I'll have to take a look at the source code under the hood. A somewhat similar project is Posit's Air project, the R formatter. That has changed my life. I know that code formatting is a relatively small amount of time for a given function you're writing, but the time savings adds up so quickly, and I don't have to be a stickler about how we should format our code across our team. We just have Air installed and format on save, and it does all the work for us. And maybe the last thing that I'm curious about, and again may have to dive into the source code, is if Jarl catches Jenny Bryan's rules around having set working directory or rm list equals ls at the beginning of a script. Hopefully Jarl will catch that, probably scream at you, maybe an emoji of Jenny at the same time. But Jarl is incredible. I'm glad that they covered it in this blog post as a reminder to me and as a reminder to hopefully others who have not yet caught on the Jarl train but are figuring out how awesome it is.
Yeah, I agree. We've seen this. I think there's a lot of, I won't call hidden gems here, but there's a lot of great concepts here that I can tell have a lot of attention to detail being put here. And also it can work hand in hand with the Air formatter as well. It's not like you have to pick one or the other. You can have the best of both worlds here. And I'm going to definitely be incorporating this both in my day-to-day dev work. I could see this being very helpful as part of a GitHub action as well. If you're getting contributions from other, developers to run their PR through for Jarl, and they can hopefully flag some potential fixes right on the spot that then the PR author can quickly bring back into their local branch and then update accordingly. So I don't see any downsides of this. I think it's easy to install. I've installed it on my dev machine here as well as on my home system, and it is, as advertised, blazing fast, but there's a lot more to this than meets the eye. And rounding out our highlights today, yes, refactoring is one step of the dev life cycle, but there is another one that if you're not doing this, you definitely should if you're building an R package application or some combination of both, and that is automated testing. Yes, this is a very prevalent topic in Mike's and I's dev life these days, as well as features we've had in our weekly highlights. And frankly, our most frequent contributor to test-related highlights is back once again, telling us when maybe there's something amiss. Maybe something kind of smells a bit. We're talking about code smells, which is a phrase we've seen a lot in the R community, but not just with just your day-to-day package or app code, in your test code as well. Maybe things look like they're passing, but under the hood, there could be a few issues that if one thing goes haywire, good luck trying to debug it all. And so we're going to talk about a very comprehensive post here that has been authored by Jacob Sobolewski over the Absalon team as a software engineer. And he titles this post, 11 Test Smells That Make Your Tests Lie to You. Nobody likes lying, right? Not in this show, hopefully. Let's talk about, Mike and I are going to highlight 3 each from this massive list that each of them, I dare say, have a lot of ideas that we can draw upon here. And the first one, I'll start with the first 3 that caught my eye. This is an interesting one because when you look at this example, you don't really see anything amiss. He calls this the mystery guest smell. When you have a test that looks very logical. The example here is about using a specific currency in the result you might get. And in this case, the currency is based on Great Britain, it looks like. And it works fine in your machine, right? But if you have like a developer team and maybe they're in a different region, they realize, wait, it fails. Why is that? And that's because in R, there is an option for the currency format. You might have like dollars if you're in the US, or in this case, in international, you might have GBP. Well, you may not know right away what the option is that's been flagged for your R version. So it could fail for somebody, maybe even future you, if you decide to change locales or whatnot. So what is the fix in this case? That is to be explicit about the option that you're setting. So in this example to fix it, we use the very important with R, however you want to pronounce it, that package where you can temporarily, for the scope of that function, set an option to a certain value. So in this case, with R, they set the option to currency equal GBP, and then the test will work as expected, assuming the result is, again, doing what it expects to do. So that is definitely something. Options in your R environment, you may or may not realize can impact your test results because it is, again, an example of state that's outside of your control in the day-to-day dev work. Now, another one that can happen is, and I've been guilty of this, you've got a lot of assertions in your test. A lot of expect equals, expect true for some type of object you're getting out. Maybe it's a data frame, maybe it's a list of stuff. And, you're trying to be efficient. You're like, okay, I'll have one test. I call it data pipeline works in this example. And I'll just throw 5 or 6 of these assertions in there and call it a day. well, that's not the best for readability and intentionality that we often should have when we do unit testing. So the fix for this is to split this up into logical sub-tests, if you will, or maybe just separate tests if you want to do this, with explicit titles of what each of these assertions are doing, such as, hey, am I getting the right number of rows, like 100? Am I removing any rows of missing value? Or am I producing only numeric results? And you've now got more lines technically, but future you will be able to read this a lot better, especially when things go haywire. Whereas if you had everything in that one single test and you just see that the test data pipeline works fails, you've got to dig in to see which part actually failed. So having that separation of concerns, that modularity, if you will, I think is a great, great framework to have. And I dare say maybe not all the AI generated code might follow that principle. So that's where even if you're not writing the code, you probably want to review it to see if it can detect that situation. And then the last one I'll highlight here is, sometimes we have to do some tasks to get the test ready. You might have to set up some boilerplate functions to do some state kind of generation. Maybe you're making a mock object of things. And you've got a lot of setup, even if you're just making a list of a whole bunch of things. And then somewhere in there is your actual test. But you already got like 20-ish, 30-ish lines setting up this state. And then you've got to just wade through these setup kind of lines. And he calls this the obscure test smell, where the test is in there, the test is doing what it's supposed to do, but you just can't really find it very well. So then one way to help with this is to take that setup code, make that into a separate function that you can put elsewhere in your testing, folder or whatnot, and then simply call that setup function as one line instead of doing it all in line in that test itself. So I think that is a very nice feature here where you could just abstract away all the boilerplate of maybe making a list or a mock object, and then you can easily find your test, in that situation. So those are 3 tips I'm already going to take in my dev workshop. Mike, what kind of test did you find, test smells, I should say, that you resonated with here?
There's a lot of great stuff in here. One kind of easy one is meaningless titles. Sometimes you'll see a unit test title that just says, check that function XYZ works. And that's an easy thing to write. You don't have to think about it much, but it's not very informative. And Jakob argues that a good title is a specification that describes really the expected behavior and the conditions. So a great rule of thumb here is to actually write the title before you write the test body and explain what you're about to test. Another one is tests that never fail. So if you have tests that sort of pass regardless of what the code does, oftentimes by checking only that some error occurred and not actually checking the error message, or that a result is like a generic list but doesn't contain the named elements that you're kind of expecting that might break other things downstream, sort of like not being specific enough. And the fix there is always try to assert on a specific error message. I think, hopefully most folks know that if you are using expect error in the test that package, there is a second argument to that function that allows you to specify the entire message or a portion of the message that you expect to see back, and not just the types. I've actually also been working quite a bit lately on unit testing our code against actual data and values and not just output types and error messages, either firing or not firing. And I can't recommend that enough because it has caught a few things that we had not caught otherwise. I don't know if that's called snapshot testing or if snapshot testing is more like a shiny related thing.
No, I think snapshot testing applies not just to Shiny. I've seen a lot of people speak highly of it.
Okay, yep. I'm still not 100% sure of our best approach to storing those kind of RDS or data frames or objects that we want to test against, I assume under the test folder, and then whether or not we should be checking those into Git, which I think we should, but when I figure it out, I'll let you know. And if you have any hot tips, Eric, be happy to hear it.
Yeah, unfortunately, I just saved a few RDS files in the test folder and called it a day.
Hey, there you go. That's probably what we're going to stick with. And then the last one was an interesting one that I really haven't come across, and I hadn't even come across this with our function called defer. But sort of the issue here would be if test B, only passes if test A ran first. If you have some sort of dependency order in your unit testing, that can cause some problems downstream. And the fix here would be to make sure that your tests are self-contained and use this defer function from the wither package with our package to ensure that cleanup happens even if a test fails, and that environment kind of stays self-contained, if you will. So there's, I think, a total of 11 different tips in this blog post that are fantastic. I think we covered 6 of them. So go to rweekly.org to catch the other 5.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's so much to learn from here. And then you may be wondering, wow, that sounds like a lot. And I can speak for myself. I know I've caused more than a handful of these smells in some of my recent testing, that I've done in my Shiny apps or packages. What's an easy way to see where this is happening and hopefully get some help along the way? Well, at the end of the post, you may want to look at what he's put together, which is a comprehensive prompt that you could put into an AI LLM coding agent and have it help you identify these and hopefully, be able to solve them, whether you intervene and manually solve it, but at least see where they are. So you may want to copy that into your favorite configurations as you go forward. I've been trying to assemble, whether it's skills from like the Posit team or custom ones we're doing in our org, and making it so that Claude can be more informed when I build certain features, or in the case we talked about in the last highlight, refactoring existing frameworks that it follows the best principles. So there's never a dull moment in learning in this space, but that is a great way to apply what you learn here and find it in legacy code bases. So lots of great learning to be had, and don't feel bad out there. I don't think anybody's had this perfect by any means, but we all can get better, and this is a great way to do it.
Couldn't agree more.
And you can, level up a lot of things in your dev stack or your just inspiration for data science in general by looking at the rest of the issue of our weekly. And, we are running low on time, so we won't highlight a couple of additional finds here, but I do see, scanning through the issue, we got some great things on merging concepts of machine learning with soccer and football and forecasting the upcoming World Cup and many other interesting packages that are coming through and all that. So as usual, we want this whole effort is a community effort. We love to hear about your contributions to the data science in our community, and we want to hear about it and hopefully get it into the next issue. In fact, my trusted co-host here, Mike's post that we alluded to last week about security and AI is in this issue. So you will find it right there at rweekly.org, just like the rest of the highlights here, as well as how you can contribute here, which is via a pull request to our draft of the upcoming issue. Template's right there in the upper right corner. If you know Markdown, you know how to file a PR to our weekly. And also, we love to hear from you in the audience. I'm here in various social media circles. First on Blue Sky, where I am at our podcast at bsky.social. I'm also on Mastodon at our podcast at podcastindex.social. And lastly, on LinkedIn, search my name and you'll find me causing some stuff over there. Mike, where can the listeners find you?
You can find me in Blue Sky at Mike-Thomas at bsky.social, or on LinkedIn if you search Ketchbrook Analytics, KETCHBROOK. You can see what I'm up to.
Very nice. I know you've got some football viewing in the short term here, so I'm sure we'll be hearing more about your takes on that next week. That should be a fun tournament for sure.
Yes.
All right. Well, we're gonna kick the proverbial ball to the goal here and finish up our Rookie highlights for this episode. Again, we thank you very much for joining us, making our weekly part of your daily routine. And again, I think podcasts are a great way to learn and get things done at the same time. So if you're like me, you mow the lawn while you listen to a podcast, I am fine with that. Whenever you want to get your knowledge and be productive at the same time, that is all good with me. In any event, we're going to close up shop here for episode 230 of our weekly highlights, and we will be back with another episode of our weekly highlights next week.